Seattle didn't just win the Super Bowl. They may have unleashed the NFL's next dynasty. The Seahawks kept an elite young core together while the Rams loaded up with stars. Now the real nightmare begins. Seattle might be getting even better.
Yeah, you're right. It is very different. And while I think there was some of us who definitely thought the team was going to be much better than the consensus, I don't think anybody expected them to win the Super Bowl last year. And I'd say even the Seahawks fan base was not necessarily expecting it after 15 weeks into the season. So it was a pretty rapid rise, and it took Pete Carroll 3 years to get to that championship, and it took Mike Macdonald 2. So one of the differences is Mike Macdonald is not, one of the oldest coaches in the NFL. He's one of the youngest coaches in the NFL. This team, similarly to the 2013 team, is one of the youngest teams in the NFL. I think you can put this Seahawks team with their talent under 25 up against any team in the NFL. You're talking about JSN and Byron Murphy and Nicky Manwari being like 23, 24, 22 years old. It's very young, top shelf talent. So I think there's this belief that this group is growing together. I throw in the offensive line that brought back not just the starting 5, all 13 offensive linemen all the way through the practice squad come back from last year. And this was the 3rd youngest starting offensive line in the NFL. And what you really started to see is they started to mesh as the season went on. And while a lot of people, I think, associated the run game jumping at the end of the year to Ken Walker, the whole running room started getting better, somewhat similar to when they had a quiet firing of their running back coach and put Justin Outen in there. So there's a lot of things after week 16 that started going right for the offensive line, the run game, and a lot of other things where I think there's some misperceptions about that team, turnovers being another one that I can happily share with you guys.
They're in an interesting spot because heading into this season, you've got defending Super Bowl champions. They're clearly a very good team. There's a bunch of young players who could potentially take a step forward and become even better this year. But across the division, you've got the Los Angeles Rams, who were extremely close with the Seahawks last year based off the times they played them, NFC Championship game. And I think the Rams have demonstrably, inarguably gotten a lot better this offseason. The Myles Garrett trade, potentially Aaron Donald returning, Trent McDuffie bringing in multiple corners at their biggest position of weakness. So did the Seahawks keep pace with the Rams this offseason?
It's an interesting phrase. I don't know that I would say that the Rams got better. I think the Rams got more talented. I think that is undeniable. But you don't know if any team has gotten better until you get on the field and start seeing these games get played. There are folks that still believe that the Rams were the better team last year. And they, I see a shaking of a head. I know one of the people on this show may feel that way. And yet the Seahawks beat that team 2 out of 3 times. And the one time they lost, their quarterback threw 4 interceptions and they still had a field goal to win at the end. So I think that there's a lot of belief when you add the defensive player of the year, you add Trent McDuffie, you add Jalen Watson, you're probably going to add Aaron Donald. How could you not be a better team? Well, you're also having to need a quarterback that was an MVP last year, clearly the best quarterback in the league for my money. And he has to do that again at age 38. Is that going to be what he does? If he's not that same player, even with the additions, are they going to be as good as they were last year? I don't know. Puka Nacua, is he going to be able to play? Devontae Adams has gotten older. If that offense takes a step back, how much more forward does the defense have to go? So I'm not a Rams denier. I think the Rams absolutely merit the praise they've had for their offseason. But I think there's a really big misnomer about the Seahawks offseason. There was this thing called free agency that got introduced, and it broke up dynasties. It was always about you couldn't keep your talent. The Seahawks have kept the second highest percentage of snaps of a Super Bowl winner since 2010. The only team that had more snaps returning in their post-Super Bowl year was the 2020 Tampa Bay Bucks with Tom Brady. every one of the top 5 teams, well, the other 4 teams in the top 5 for retaining those snaps, won more games the following year, and 2 of them went back to the Super Bowl the next year. So I think the Seahawks have done a remarkable job of keeping their talent and compiling 12 draft picks for 2027 in a draft that's supposed to be significantly more talented than the one that they just kind of passed on this year.
Wow, look at that. I've never said the Rams were better than the Seahawks last year.
Really?
I never said that. Maybe toward the end of the season. Special teams was a big difference, though. That was the big difference between those 2 teams.
You know what, Steve? I would go a little bit further. I think special teams was a big difference.
A big difference.
But how you handle adversity is a pretty big difference as well. When things went wrong for the Rams, they stayed down, they pointed fingers, they then went and lost to Atlanta, lose to Carolina. They barely got through some of those teams in the playoffs. They tried to change a rule that was actually when the refs made the right call, even though it was a weird call, it was the right call. I don't think the Rams handled adversity very well. And if you look at the Seahawks, every time they got knocked down, they got better. After they lost to the Rams and had those 4 turnovers, they never lost another game. So I think there's more to winning on the field than just the talent and the flashy coaching.
Seattle didn't just win the Super Bowl. They may have unleashed the NFL's next dynasty. Mike Macdonald needed only 2 years to take the Seahawks to the top, and unlike the old Seahawks teams, this roster is still incredibly young. JSN, Byron Murphy II, Nick Emenwari, Devin Witherspoon. Young, elite talent that hasn't reached its ceiling yet. And that is what should scare the NFL. Because Seattle isn't defending a championship with an aging roster. They're defending it with a roster that is still growing. And the most important part, Seattle didn't break the roster apart after winning it all. Free agency was supposed to destroy the Seahawks' momentum. Instead, Seattle kept the second highest percentage of snaps from a Super Bowl winning team since 2010, behind only the 2020 Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The offensive line is the perfect example. Not just the starting 5. All 13 offensive linemen returned. And that was already the 3rd youngest starting offensive line in the NFL. As the season progressed, that unit began to click. The run game improved, the blocking improved. The entire offense started finding another gear. That's why Seattle's offseason may be getting badly misunderstood. They're not trying to rebuild. They're trying to improve a championship machine. But continuity is only half the story. The other half is terrifying. Seattle's best players are still getting better. This is where the dynasty argument gets serious. Seattle has young stars across the roster, and many of them are nowhere near their prime. JSN, Byron Murphy II, Nick Emenwari, Devin Witherspoon. The Seahawks also added 8 players in the 2026 draft, continuing to flood the roster with young talent. And they aren't simply collecting players. They're building depth around a championship foundation. That means Seattle doesn't need every young player to become a superstar. If just a few take a major step forward, this team could be significantly better than the one that already won the Super Bowl. But across the NFC West, one team looked at Seattle's championship and decided to respond with something much louder. The Rams went shopping. Los Angeles didn't just tweak the roster. They loaded it with star power. Myles Garrett, Trent McDuffie, Jalen Watson, and potentially Aaron Donald returning. Garrett alone changes the equation. He had 23 sacks last season and brings Defensive Player of the Year level production to an already dangerous defense. On paper, the Rams look terrifying. But here's the problem. More talent doesn't automatically mean a better team. The Rams still need Matthew Stafford to reproduce an MVP-level season at 38 years old. They need Puka Nacua healthy. They need Davante Adams to remain productive. And they need all those new defensive pieces to actually work together. Seattle doesn't have to prove it can become a great team. They already did. And the head-to-head record makes this rivalry even harder to dismiss. Seattle beat Los Angeles 2 out of 3 times last season. And in the Rams' one victory, Seattle's quarterback threw 4 interceptions, yet the Seahawks still had a field goal opportunity to win. That's why calling Los Angeles clearly superior doesn't tell the whole story. Special teams mattered. Adversity mattered. And after Seattle suffered that ugly loss to the Rams, something changed. They never lost again. That's championship mentality. When Seattle got knocked down, they didn't collapse. They got better. And that's the biggest threat the Rams have to deal with. So now the question isn't whether Seattle can compete with Los Angeles. The question is much more frightening. The Rams may have added more recognizable stars, but Seattle has something incredibly difficult to manufacture. Continuity, a young roster, a young head coach, a developing offensive line, young defensive stars, and a championship culture that has already been tested. Yes, there are risks. Kenneth Walker III is gone. Clint Kubiak is gone. Seattle has to replace production and prove the young players can take the next step. But if JSN gets better, if Murphy becomes dominant, if Emanwari breaks out, if Witherspoon stays healthy, if the offensive line continues developing, then the Seahawks aren't simply defending their title. They're building something much bigger. So forget the offseason headlines for a moment. The Rams may have built a monster, but Seattle already has the trophy. And the most terrifying possibility for the rest of the NFL is this. The 2025 Seahawks may not have been the finished product. They may have been the warning.
Yo, mic check 1 to 2, -1, -2. Game over for this video, folks. Smash that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe to stay in the huddle for more. This is NFL Madness, bringing the heat and signing out.